How do you burn $20 million in under 3 seconds? Washington, D.C., 1966. A CIA surveillance van is parked on the edge of a public park. Inside, 4 analysts, headphones on, equipment calibrated. The target, 2 men on a bench, suspected Soviet contacts. The mission had been in development for 5 years. It cost $20 million. It involved classified surgery, experimental neuroscience, and the full resources of the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. The analysts released the asset. 3 seconds later, tires. The most expensive surveillance operation in Cold War history was hit by a taxi, because the asset was a cat. This is the story of Project Acoustic Kitty, and it is not a joke. But to understand why 4 of the most intelligent people in American intelligence thought this would work, we need to go back to the problem they were actually trying to solve. By 1961, the CIA had a surveillance problem. Human intelligence, informants, double agents, was slow, unreliable, and expensive. Electronic surveillance was better, but the equipment was too large. You couldn't fit a listening device into a room without someone physically placing it there. The CIA needed a new solution. The requirement was simple: a mobile audio platform, autonomous, self-powered, capable of entering controlled environments without detection. In engineering terms, they needed a system that could move itself, power itself, and transmit real-time audio in a hostile environment without triggering any countermeasures. Someone in that room looked out the window and saw a cat. The logic on paper was sound. A cat is invisible in an urban environment. It moves freely through parks, embassies, public spaces. Nobody stops it. Nobody questions it. It generates no electronic signature. All they needed to do was install the hardware. The project brief was simple: turn a living cat into a functional intelligence gathering platform. The team called it Acoustic Kitty. What happened next, in the operating room, is something that doesn't appear in most history books. The surgery lasted over an hour. CIA veterinarians and electronic engineers worked together. A small microphone, the size of a grain of rice, was implanted inside the cat's ear canal. A miniature radio transmitter was placed at the base of its skull. A thin wire antenna was threaded subcutaneously, under the skin, along the spine, running from the base of the neck to the tip of the tail. The cat was now a functional listening device. The system was tested. The audio was clean. The transmitter had a range sufficient for a parked surveillance vehicle within 200 feet. On paper, the asset was operational. The engineering was flawless. The problem, as with most catastrophic intelligence failures, was not the hardware. It was the variable they didn't fully account for. The cat had its own operating system, and they couldn't patch it. During initial field tests, the asset would simply walk away. Not because of the equipment. The equipment functioned perfectly. But when the cat was hungry, it went looking for food. When it was bored, it left. When a pigeon appeared on the other side of the park, the mission was over. The CIA's response to this was entirely predictable: more surgery. Engineers attempted to suppress the cat's hunger signals by rerouting neural pathways, essentially modifying the nervous system to block the sensation of hunger. This was experimental neuroscience applied to an intelligence asset in 1963. After multiple revisions, the asset was cleared for field deployment. 5 years of development, $20 million. And on the day of the first live operation, the system had one final catastrophic variable that no one had engineered for. October 1966, Rock Creek Park, Washington, D.C. The surveillance team identified the target: 2 men seated on a park bench, believed to be Soviet contacts exchanging information. The van was positioned, frequencies locked. The asset was released from the vehicle. The cat crossed approximately 4 feet of open sidewalk. A yellow taxi, routine DC traffic, was not part of the threat model. End of field test. End of program. Here is the actual engineering post-mortem, stripped of all politics. The system had one critical vulnerability that was never resolved. Autonomous biological systems cannot be fully controlled by external operators. The cat was not a machine. The cat was a system that had its own priorities, its own threat model, and its own decision tree. And that decision tree had not been written by the CIA. You can modify hardware, you can upgrade firmware, but you cannot override an organism's core behavioral architecture, not with the technology available in 1966. Not without destroying the very thing that made it useful. The CIA had built a perfectly functional listening device and housed it inside an agent who had absolutely no interest in the mission. The official report buried the failure in bureaucratic language. But what it admitted, between the lines, changed how American intelligence thought about covert technology forever. The CIA's internal memo from 1967 stated, and I quote, "The program would not be practical at this time with a high degree of probability. $20 million, 5 years of research, experimental neuroscience, summarized in one sentence of government understatement." What changed after Acoustic Kitty? The Directorate of Science and Technology made a critical architectural shift. They stopped trying to integrate hardware into biological systems. They started building remote platforms instead, unmanned, purely electronic, fully controllable. The logic failures of Acoustic Kitty became a foundational case study in what engineers now call the autonomy problem. The gap between what a system is designed to do and what it actually decides to do once it's in the field. You see this same problem today in AI systems that behave unexpectedly when exposed to real-world input, in autonomous vehicles that encounter edge cases their training data never included, in any system where you've handed decision-making to an agent and that agent's priorities don't perfectly align with yours. The CIA learned this lesson in 1966, with a cat, in a park. The rest of us are still learning it. Project Acoustic Kitty was declassified in 2001. Most people laughed. The engineers who built it probably didn't. If you want to understand how intelligence operations actually work, the systems, the logic, and the failures, this channel runs one briefing every week. Subscribe. We'll keep the transmitter running.